Just after midnight on May 28, 2026, radar operators aboard US warships in the Persian Gulf spotted 4 small contacts moving fast toward commercial shipping lanes. Within seconds, alarms sounded across multiple combat information centers. Within an hour, every drone would be destroyed. The launch site behind them would be wiped out. And yet, by the end of the night, Iran may have achieved exactly what it wanted. Because this wasn't simply a battle over drones, it was a battle over economics. One side was spending tens of thousands of dollars, the other was spending millions, and that's the real story of what happened in the Gulf. To understand it, you first have to understand the weapon that started it. Iran's one-way attack drones are designed around a simple idea: make defense more expensive than attack. They're mass-produced, GPS-guided, and built to fly low enough to complicate detection. Each drone costs roughly $50,000 to $70,000, and each one only has to work once. But even more important, not every drone has to reach its target. The swarm itself is the weapon, because the mission isn't always destruction. Sometimes the mission is forcing a response. And on May 28th, Iran forced exactly that. 4 drones were already airborne, but there was something US radar operators couldn't see. A 5th drone sat on a launch rail near the strategic port of Bandar Abbas on Iran's southern coast, fueled, armed, and minutes away from launch. That created a much bigger problem. US commanders weren't just trying to stop 4 drones already in the air. They needed to eliminate the 5th before it ever left the ground, and they needed to do it without sending manned aircraft deep into Iran's air defense network. Intelligence confirmed operators at Bandar Abbas were preparing the 5th drone. After losing 4 aircraft, they weren't shutting down, they were trying again. Now commanders faced another decision. Sending carrier aircraft close to Iran's coastal defenses carried obvious risks, but there was another option. A Tomahawk cruise missile launched from a US destroyer operating far offshore. Moments after launch, the missile dropped to low altitude and began its terrain-following flight path. Using navigation systems and digital mapping, it remained difficult to detect while approaching the target. When it reached the compound, the result was devastating. The launch infrastructure was destroyed, the control station was destroyed, and the 5th drone exploded before it ever left the rail. On paper, the operation was nearly flawless. 4 drones intercepted, a 5th destroyed on the ground. No US losses, no damage to shipping. Mission accomplished. The 4 airborne drones became the immediate priority. From the USS Abraham Lincoln, F/A-18 Super Hornets were quickly directed toward the contacts. Against small drones, the weapon of choice is often the AIM-9X Sidewinder. It's an infrared-guided missile designed to lock onto heat signatures, even the modest heat coming from a drone's small engine. Over open water, the interceptors engaged the incoming aircraft. One after another, the drones were destroyed before reaching the shipping lanes. Problem solved? Not quite, because a swarm isn't just a collection of drones, it's a network. Whether through radio links or pre-planned coordination, the effectiveness of a swarm depends on maintaining control and synchronization. Break that connection, and the swarm stops behaving like a single weapon. That's where another aircraft entered the fight. Behind the Super Hornets was an EA-18G Growler. The Growler is one of the most advanced electronic warfare aircraft in service. Instead of focusing on shooting things down, its job is to attack the enemy's ability to communicate. While the interceptors moved toward the drones, the Growler hunted for the signals connecting them to their operators near Bandar Abbas. Once those frequencies were identified, powerful electronic jamming flooded the links. The connection didn't weaken, it collapsed. The drones lost coordination, and without that coordination, they became far easier targets. The airborne threat was eliminated, but the launch site was still active. But only if you're measuring success tactically. Strategically, something else was happening. Later that same night, the USS Abraham Lincoln encountered a different threat. While transiting the Arabian Sea toward the Strait of Hormuz, sensors detected a new contact moving steadily toward the carrier strike group. The Aegis combat system tracked it, and E-2D Hawkeye tracked it. The object ignored radio calls and continued its approach. It was identified as a Shahed 139 drone. At that point, the strike group commander had options. He could allow shipboard defenses to engage if the drone came close enough, or he could destroy it far away from the carrier. The choice was obvious. An F-35C Lightning II was launched. And this is where the economics become almost absurd. An F-35C costs more than $100 million. The drone it was intercepting costs a tiny fraction of that. But the comparison misses the point. The aircraft wasn't launched because it was the cheapest solution. It was launched because it was the safest. Distance matters. A close-in defensive system engages threats when they're already near the ship. An F-35 can engage them dozens of miles away. That extra distance creates time. Time for identification, time for decisions, and time for a second chance if something goes wrong. Identification matters too. A radar contact can't tell you exactly what a drone is carrying. A pilot can. By flying close enough for visual confirmation, the aircraft removes uncertainty from the decision-making process. And there's another factor: communication. An armed fighter intercepting an approaching drone sends a message. If the drone continues after that point, hostile intent becomes difficult to dispute. The legal and strategic justification for engagement becomes much clearer. The F-35 pilot tracked the Shahed through darkness and cloud cover using the aircraft's sensor suite. The drone maintained course. The rules of engagement were met. An AIM-9X Sidewinder left the rail. Seconds later, the Shahed 139 was gone. The carrier continued its transit. Again, the United States had succeeded. Every threat had been neutralized. Every system had performed as designed. But Iran wasn't measuring success the same way, because none of this was cheap. Every Super Hornet sortie consumes flight hours on aircraft with finite service lives. Every AIM-9X missile costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. A Tomahawk costs well over $1 million. An F-35 flight hour costs tens of thousands more once fuel, maintenance and support are factored in. Iran understands that. And that's the key. Its strategy isn't built around defeating US forces in a conventional battle. It's built around forcing the United States to keep paying for defense. When warships at sea proved difficult to hit, the focus shifted elsewhere. To targets that can't move: American bases across the Gulf, facilities in Bahrain, installations in Iraq, airfields in Kuwait, and especially Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, home to thousands of US personnel. Many sit within range of Iran's ballistic missile inventory. Weapons like the Fateh 110 and Cham-1 aren't designed merely to destroy individual structures. Configured correctly, they're intended to disrupt operations across entire bases, runways, aircraft parking areas, fuel storage, personnel concentrations. When a US installation in Kuwait became the target of Iran's response planning, it wasn't random. It was a continuation of the same logic. The United States will defend whatever it commits to defending, and every defense has a price tag. That's what the events of May 28th revealed. Iran's drone campaign isn't designed to win decisive military victories. It's designed to create recurring costs. The strike on Bandar Abbas reportedly eliminated most of the launch capability in that sector, but not all of it. The next morning, Iran still retained the ability to launch more drones. The threat wasn't removed. It was managed, temporarily, and that's the deeper lesson. The drones themselves aren't the real weapon. The drones are the trigger. They're the mechanism that forces the deployment of Tomahawks, Super Hornets, F-35s, Growlers, missile defenses, maintenance crews, and logistics networks. Iran spends thousands. The United States spends millions. Not because its systems are ineffective, but because defending ships, bases, and personnel is non-negotiable. That's the battlefield Iran is trying to create. One where victory doesn't come from sinking a carrier or destroying an airbase. One where the objective is to keep the engagement going. On May 28, 2026, the US military intercepted every threat it faced. The pilots succeeded. The technology worked. The strikes were precise. But somewhere on Iran's southern coast, planners were looking at a different scoreboard. Not how many drones survived, not how many targets were hit, but how much it cost the other side to stop them. And in modern warfare, that may be the most important number of all.